Hey everyone, welcome to the fireside chat. Today we're talking about helping OT and IT navigate an evolving ecosystem. And I will tease, after this, we are going to have a happy hour. Chris Luecke, host of Manufacturing Happy Hour, is going to host our happy hour, which is honestly one of my favorite times over the course of the year, every time we get to go ahead and do that. Today, I am joined by two awesome people in general. Dave McMorran. Dave is the Director of Sales Engineering at Litmus. And I'm also joined by Travis Cox. Travis, I know it's a new title, but I'm going to try to get it right. Chief Technology Evangelist at Inductive Automation. Did I get that one right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's good. I'm glad I took notes. So today, we're going to talk the theme is change is constant and manufacturers are never at a loss for new challenges. I'm going to ask Dave and Travis some questions on that. I do want to say, if you guys have questions, please feel free to go ahead and throw them in the Q&A that you guys can see there. One of my favorite parts about these shows is trying to stump the guests. And so this is going to be your opportunity to go ahead and stump the guests. So to kick off, roles are evolving. And in IT and OT and all across IIoT and digital transformation for manufacturers, how is this related to overall company operations and how is it driving efficiency and growth? Dave, I'd like to throw it over to you.
Great, thanks, Dave. So what I've seen a lot is, we talk about the IT and OT convergence and trying to get the two together. What I've seen is a lot of customers are now creating new groups and new roles that are bringing in all the different parties to, such as IT and OT. And you're talking about controls engineers and data scientists and business analysts and getting them all together because they're now trying to solve a problem that requires a little bit of all of those things. So I really see there's new groups are popping up, new titles that we're seeing. And because of what IoT is doing and Industry 4.0, that there's so many layers and so many parts to it that you really have to bring in people in those areas and to solve those problems. You're not seeing just a controls person or a SCADA person solving a problem. It's got to be a group of people with different skill sets and different access to different systems.
Absolutely. Travis, are you seeing something similar or what are you seeing?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, we can see that the trends like digital transformation, kind of the demand for data, the want to do more with that data from businesses, where that is changing the dynamic within the culture of the organization, right? They have to. We have these systems that have been siloed for so long, right? If you will, the OT world's been different and isolated from the IT world, and there's been protection in place and all that. Well, in order to make use of data, the data has to come from the OT world. So we had to have these two starting to work together. And I've definitely seen new roles. I've seen a lot of companies who've been successful at some of these implementations and proof of concepts are where they're getting their management on the OT side, engaged with the management on the IT side, saying, look, we're going to form a new group. And this new group is going to be responsible for the needs of the company, right? This is not something that each team's, yes, they have their own individual things responsible for, but there are business objectives that they're trying to make, and so by working together, they can meet those in the best way possible, right? The most secure way, and making sure that we're avoiding issues like shadow IT or opening ourselves up to vulnerabilities. I mean, all the different problems that can happen if we're not marching towards that same direction. So I've seen a lot of that, and it's to me more digital transformations, more culture change, right? Technology exists. The tools are out there. It's just a matter of adoption and how that's driven from the executive team.
Yeah, great point. One other point on that, or along those, as roles are changing, I think another thing that I'm seeing is in the IT group are now putting in, data scientists are falling under more of that IT group, not an OT group. And now IT is all of a sudden saying, hey, manufacturing, I can actually help you. Right, because I've got the analytics and these tools to look at the data, and I've never seen that happen before. IT's always been an impediment to OT, and now all of a sudden they're kind of saying, "Hey, I think I can help you," and so it's starting to work together that way too.
Yeah, I mean, you got the tools on the OT level that historically, where we didn't turn them into middleware because they did their job, but didn't want to touch it, became brittle at a certain point, right? And
Right.
and operations teams are like, no, I just don't want to mess with this, but there's vital data that's there. What's happening, I think, and we'll talk about this more, is this architecture change, right? That's happening on the foundation on the OT layer, where we're now thinking about, okay, let's make sure we're getting data into infrastructure, into interoperable, into standards, right? That can be available, because if you get it into, say, an MQTT broker, get it into a relational database, get into a data lake, then you have the opportunity for IT folks to then go and tap in that data and use it, and get the data scientists to start turning that into insights. And you get a lot of that collaboration that's going to start happening where it just wouldn't have happened before, right? Because they just didn't have access. And it was sometimes very, very difficult to go and try to well, how can I tap into this thing, or, and can I do it safely, right? So I think that mentality and that architecture is changing, where it's going to allow for this to happen a lot more often.
Absolutely. I think all of these are really good points. I especially, Travis, like your point when you were talking about change and culture change, and how all of these projects are very much like change management projects. And if we don't change the culture of an organization, we don't particularly have the opportunity to go succeed in any of these large digital transformation or transformational projects. I want to kind of continue down that path, right? Down the culture change path. So historically, we as OT people, as operational technology people, we don't like change, right? We want the 55-year-old PLC that has been running for the last 55 years, and we don't want to consider changing it because it's always worked. Why would I want to go change the thing that worked? And there's lots of kind of legacy thoughts along those lines. As we go and look at what is the future going to become? I want to ask you guys one of my favorite questions that I get to ask all my guests on Manufacturing Hub, and we'll go start with Dave. But I want to ask, what does the future become? I would like to ask you to predict the future. What do you think the future is going to be in the next, 1, 3, 5 years? Are we going to continue this transition? Are we going to be able to pull in some of these tech folks who no longer are working for large technology companies and be able to capture some of their knowledge and some of their skills into the manufacturing sector? What do you think that looks like, Dave?
Yeah. I wish I could predict the future, but what I'm seeing in the trends, Travis, I'm sure you're seeing the same thing, is getting better data, more data, and starting to work with that. I see ML no longer as this kind of sci-fi movie type of thing, and actually being implemented at the edge. It's going to take time, or not at the edge, but in general. But it's going to take time for the tools to develop. But it's the same thing with the every tool in automation and in general, that over time the tools get easier and easier to use. More people use them, more people get experience. So I could see ML being part of that. I see cloud becoming a bigger part of that. I see some of these legacy systems that we've dealt with, for 40 years are starting to see how, like there's better solutions out there, but manufacturing is very slow to change. It always has been. So it's going to take time for some of those to transition. But I really think people are realizing how important data is to that. And I think really, if you look at it, that's been caused by, or been driven by, people's reality that when they start going to Amazon and Amazon suggesting stuff for you to buy, that Google being able to finish your sentences on an email, just stuff we're seeing every day, that subconsciously you're realizing, wow, information is actually valuable, and that people are realizing that if I get that value or get that data out of the systems, I can actually start using it and making better decisions with it. And that's a trend that I'm seeing as well. Just getting more information out of it, not just the what's my temperature, but like what's my temperature here, what's my temperature outside, what product am I running, all those things, and tying that all in. It's really that big data type of solution. So I really see that even accelerating from where we are right now. Travis?
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, I agree with that. And I think one of the big parts that the one trend we're starting to see a lot, right, is, if I look at SCADA, and we've been in that world for a long time as a vendor, people are connecting to their devices, and it could be a 25-year-old, 30-year-old PLC, right? It could be old equipment that's in there in the brownfield world, right? Connecting to that. and they're in the SCADA system building out their tags and their models and building out their application, and that is serving the operations team. Well, again, if it stops there, then it's not really useful to the rest of the business, right? Okay, so then we don't want to turn that into middleware and have to then try to expose that higher layers. It's this mapping multiple times concept, especially looking at ML and AI and all of that. If we're having to map data all these different ways, how can you trust the source, the data at the end of the day, right? And make sure it's a good quality data. So what we're seeing is this trend to have that single source of truth, to basically define all of that at the edge and the data with its context. So being able to model data properly, and that's also a change that organizations have to think about is how we standardize on our data and have models across our entire enterprise, right, from site to site, so that we can get into these high level things and leverage them at scale. So the idea of having data models and having that context at the edge, that single source of truth, I do think that more and more devices will, especially new devices you bring in, will have these concepts, but that unified namespace idea is starting to really take hold. And I think that will come to really to fruition. A lot of people will start implementing that in the next 5 years. I think it's a really important step that's got to happen before we really can go a lot further. You got to solve those foundational issues.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. And part of it, I think, is there is some, I feel, I don't know if it's resistance is the right word for it, but this mentality that's been going on for 30 years where all we cared about was tag name value and timestamp, right? I talk about that all the time, is that is not cutting it anymore, right? We need more of that context of the data, to your point, Travis, the data models to get there, because as you add more context to the data, the more value it has, right? And all the way up to the chain on the business analytics. So I think there's a little bit of a mind switch from a traditional OT person to start thinking about data in a little bit, in a different way than they have for the last, 2 or 3 decades.
Yeah, and there's going to be a little bit of they have to have not only acceptance of that, but a little bit of investment into making this possible, right? You're going to have to bring in some new tools and new architectures and be willing to you could do that safely in parallel with what you have, right? This is not one of these things. A lot of folks out there are like really, when you talk about Industry 4.0 and digital transformation, we're talking about this end game, right? Which is a holy grail, sure, but you get like very clouded, right? Like, oh my gosh, how do I get there? When there's some simple steps that can be taken now in parallel that could start that transition. What kind of business cases do you have that you want to solve? Well, let's put some tools and things in place to solve that business case, right? And get some ROI, get some wins, move on to the next one. And ultimately, you're going to start building out an architecture and foundation that allows you to do a lot more. And you can't just take it all at once, right? You can't eat the whole elephant at the same time.
Right. I agree, piece by piece, right? So don't, like you were talking about, Dave, you mentioned the 30-year-old PLC or whatever, don't want to rip it out. Well, same thing with IoT or same thing collecting data, right, Travis? It's like, okay, let's make your SCADA your data source. Let's make your historian your data source. Don't rip it out, leave it, right? Just let's get that data out and start working with it better.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, leave that PLC is working and you don't want to replace it. It's expensive. I get it, right? Leave it in place and bridge that brownfield world with the OT world. Think of what's going to be my objective, my goal. Then what's my ideal architecture look like? And how do I make both brownfield and greenfield fit into that architecture so that going forward, I have everything in place to do to go where I want to go.
Right.
Absolutely. I think all of these are really good points. Kind of to that, one of the things that surprised me is there are many, I'll call them IT tools that lots of us folks not working at the plants take for granted. Like I'll throw out like Power BI, Tableau, kind of just basic business analyst tools. And I cannot tell you how many times I've walked into a facility and the answer to their problem was the Power BI license that they already probably have. And many people being on the OT side don't even consider that because it's not a legacy tool. So there are many easy tools that are easily available for many people. I think that there are huge opportunities in the coming years to just go leverage tools that already exist to go solve problems that we solved in the IT world 5-10 years ago. Speaking of IT versus OT, we've got a question that has come in from Brian, and I want to go talk about it. I think this is the right time, and I want more people to go ask questions. So Brian is saying is that we see this IT OT convergence, and we were talking about those IT data scientists, and we're starting to work with OT data. What are your thoughts regarding the specific domain knowledge often required to properly analyze that OT data by the IT data scientist? I'm going to give these guys a moment to think about that question. And I have a story. So I'm working with a client, and this basically exact same situation has come up, right? It is, hey, I've got a data scientist works for corporate. And as part of this, they're asking me to go send over all of the alarm information. But maybe I don't know how to go get all of the alarm information. Maybe we're struggling to understand what it is. And let's say there's, I don't know, 3 million alarm notifications since we last kind of cleared out anything in the historian. And how do I go send this over? And how can I go provide context, which is key to all of these things, to go help them understand what this looks like? Because if I just go drop a million different or millions of different alarm events, there is very little chance they're going to be able to contextualize and understand this. So I think we're already seeing this, but I'd like to start with Dave and say, Dave, what are your thoughts on the IT data scientists and the contextualization that we need?
Well, I can tell you right off, I don't even have to think about it because I hear it from data scientists all the time when we start talking about getting data from the OT to, say, a cloud vendor and land the data there. Is they're always asking, I need more context, right? Because again, if you start looking at data from a tag name and a value and a timestamp, like we've done for 30, 40 years, right? They don't know what that means. So that's why I talk about how adding context to the data is adding value. So creating those data models that, like you're talking about, Travis, that becomes very important because the data scientists want that data model standardized, right? So it doesn't matter which PLC or which factory it's coming from, that data model becomes standardized, that they can then go take that data and start querying and doing their job and making that easier. So that's a big part, is really about adding context to the data. That's now what that looks like. There are some standards out there, but you can also create your own standards. I mean, I think the important part is to keep that as a central point of truth, like you mentioned, Travis, that create a data model, not that they can't be changed, right? Have a change process in there, but start adding the context of data for the data scientists to start working with. And in a format they're used to, getting into a data, some type of data lake or database that, of their preference. So, we can send data wherever we want. So it's just a matter of getting it whatever format that they want and into the data, the landing point that they want as well. Travis?
I think that last point is really important in that I'll go back to data model in a second, but if I have those models defined, I need to get that data stored against those models in some sort of data lake, right? So there's a lot of technologies out there, and there are ones that are more conducive to that. It's going to make it easier for the data scientists to actually, query and get that context immediately.
Right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I just thinking back to the days where, on your historian, you create your tag name and you see a tag name of, P2 A4, underscore something, and it's you need a decoder ring to figure out what that tag is, and there's no standard. And you go to one historian in the same plan, another historian, and they're completely different on that. And like, how do you parse all that data out? So that's again where the context was on the data model that you can actually build, and that's why it becomes important.
Yeah, and I'll going back to data model. I think it sounds self-explanatory here, right? But I'll say it in that when you are building a model, we have to also consider some of that domain expertise and knowledge you're talking about there, Dave. That let's say there is a value in the PLC that's a 0, 1, or 2, and it's a state or some enumeration. Well, that needs to be actually in the model needs to be mapped to something that's meaningful to the data scientist. So that
running, stopped, whatever, right?
Yeah. Again, it seems self-explanatory, but it's really important when you're defining a model. Don't look at the PLC to define your model. Look at what you want that equipment and that machine to reflect, because that's what we're going to define these, ML algorithms off of. Right. Another important piece of it, and this is I've seen just problems, with seeing data scientists struggle, is you get a value, and it's like, well, what is that value? What are the units? What's the range of the value? What's the accepted range? What do we want the target range to be? Like, so that needs to also be available in that model, right? We need to, your process value should be very clear. This is in PSI, and here's the range and here's the target. Like, here's what we want it to be, because then they'll have an understanding of what is correct for the process, right? And depending on what you're trying, what business case you're trying to solve. Let's say you're doing predictive analytics, predicting machine failure, right? Well, you need to kind of understand what is it that those domain experts who have been running the equipment know what's a good profile look like versus what's a bad profile look like. So you're going to get the data, but you also need to have that expertise, data scientists, they can understand how they can build the anomaly detection or whatever, so that there is going to be that working together on these, because until we have a library out there of all of these algorithms people just built out that we can just take off the shelf and use, we got that context, being able to clearly understand that, have the teams working together so that the expertise can be given so that they can ultimately solve that business case in the best way possible. Again, it seems easy. It seems like no problem, but it's hard to do in practice, right? You have to really, has to be a change that has to be accepted, that this is where we're going to architect it.
Right. Just one more comment on the data model, where you're talking about very much on the tag, the PLC tag and the process data. But what I always like to talk about also is adding external data to the system. What batch were you running? What SKU were you running?
Yeah.
What shift was it? I mean, what operator was it? Because once you have that and you land that in the data lake, the data scientist, it makes it really easy for the data scientist to go and look and say, hey, this machine runs worse on shift 2, or we're using more energy on this SKU than this SKU. Let's run this earlier. You can just change some of those behaviors and start, getting a return on investment, getting value from that data. And I think just simple things like that, which is not difficult to do, but I like I said, I think people still have that on the OT side, still have that mentality of tag name value timestamp. I've coined it as TVT, but it's the, adding more context gives you more value, and it makes the job easier. Someone mentioned that earlier today from Pont Lane, actually, about how they can get to the data and get to the problems quicker, right? The faster you get to the problem quicker, the more time you have to fix it.
Absolutely. I think all of these are really good points. I would say, kind of to both Dave and Travis's point, one of the biggest mistakes that I see groups making is building what they want the future to be based upon their current state and based upon what they currently have, and not going and having the conversation of where do we want to be in 5 to 10 years, and building the infrastructure and building systems to allow them to actually go reach those goals, as opposed to having to go through and either rebuild or give up halfway through. The next part that I'd like to talk about is I'd like to talk about opportunities, right? We talk a lot about IT versus OT. We talk about digital transformation, and those are really big words. But I'd like to talk about, what are some of the biggest opportunities that using the data and treating the data as an asset will help us do, and how they'll become a competitive advantage into the future. Travis, I'm seeing you shake your head yes. So hopefully you're prepped and ready to go. So I'd love to get kind of the biggest opportunities. And if you've got a use case or a couple of use cases that you'd like to share, would love to be able to go showcase those as well, please.
Yeah. So the great news, there's a lot of opportunity, right? A lot of great opportunity exists out there. I think one of the lowest hanging fruit opportunities is, and we've seen this as a result of the pandemic, in that when we had to go work at home, we got disconnected. And, in our personal lives, we had all these social media tools and text messaging and emails, all these things that kept people connected, right? We look in the OT world, is when I went home, was I connected? Can I still see the data that we have and all of that? So I think a big opportunity is just being able to get data to the right consumers, right? To the right people. And we can leverage smartphones and tablets. We can leverage the cloud to do that I've seen a lot of organizations, as a good example of, I got my SCADA system on-prem, and we basically create an outbound connection to publish data, to the cloud, say using MQTT, publish data to the cloud, and have a cloud dashboard, read only, but it'd be able to get that data to, and have somebody just go to a URL, see that data, get access to it, right? And so then the organization starts thinking, well, okay, how can I make this, how can I do more of this for different people in my organization, right? You have plant 4 people, but what about some of the, C-level folks or managers or plant managers who want certain kinds of data? How can we how can we provide that, and what kind of data should they be getting? So I think it's a good opportunity. I mean, we've seen it. If we can not only get access to data on the plant floor, but bring it in and try to get access to some of the data that might have been isolated or stranded, get that in and just give it in front of people's eyes, they can already start making decisions based on that, right? And you don't have to get into ML and all that yet. So I think that's a big opportunity, and I'm seeing a lot of companies starting to take advantage of that. And the technology exists, right, to make that super easy. Outside of that, when you really look at, where things are going, I'm really excited about, companies being able to, if they can standardize their models to be able to solve some real challenges at scale and to help really ultimately reduce downtime, right? Increase yields and increase profits, and because they're smarter about how they're approaching the manufacturing, because they're able to use that data more efficiently. And there are a lot of great, not only cloud tools, but a lot of great companies that are helping, guide in that direction. So anyways, I think there's some big opportunity there. But for me, the biggest one is just get more data in and get it to people. And that's going to solve a lot.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think the opportunities it depends on where the customer is, right? And if you start, because I'm dealing with, just like you, Travis, probably, right? That you've got some customers like, I have no data collection, zero, right? Okay, great. Let's start there and just start like, is your asset running? Like, let's just do something pretty straightforward and do that. And then I've got all the way up to the other end where IT data scientists have developed a machine learning model. They've tested it, but they have no idea how to deploy it, how to scale it, how to make it repeatable, how to get to the data ingested in a normalized fashion from all these different systems. So, and then everything in between. So it really depends on, there's opportunity at every company to use that data. It just depends on where they're at in their journey on it. So I think that opportunity can vary quite a bit, but there's huge opportunity to use that data.
Yeah, and I think exactly right in that a lot of organizations just don't even have they don't even have access to a lot of the data that's there, right?
Right.
And just being able to unlock that, I think, a tremendous opportunity comes from that. And you could do that, leave what tools you have in place, do it in parallel. That's right. That's what IoT is all about, is to be able to kind of unlock and get access to it, and by leveraging new technology and get their teams to work together to make that happen. It's exciting.
Right. Yeah. And I think if you look back, and, I've been in the manufacturing automation space for a long time, there's at some point the cost to fix a problem, just becomes too great than the problem, right? If you think about Six Sigma and Black Belt Six Sigma and lean manufacturing, 1 out of a million, you can make it 1 out of 10 million, but the cost to do that might be just astronomical to get there. So you've got a return on investment you need to look at as well. But I think for those companies that have, gotten to that point where they can't make it better, that exposing some of this data that they're not looking at before, that siloed data or thinking about it differently, will shine some light on some of those opportunities where they can improve their businesses, even though they think that the cost to do it might be too great. I think just exposing that data, like you said, Travis, getting to the right people, I think just having that is going to shed light on some new opportunities for them.
Right.
Absolutely. I like this. I feel like we could continue just this segment of the conversation for the next 5 hours, but I feel like we hit on a couple of good points. We hit on.
I have a happy hour to be at, Dave. Sorry.
You do have a happy hour to be at. Yes. You've made a video of a drink for happy hour, which everyone will see in about 15 minutes. But we want to talk about architecture, right? And we talked a little bit about legacy architecture. We've certainly talked about some new solutions. Both the people on either side of me certainly are out there doing a lot of work, especially with some of the newer solutions. Neither the legacy solutions nor the new solutions necessarily have any very hard and firm standards, which sometimes can make it easy to go develop for different customers. Sometimes it can make it a bit difficult to go develop for new customers, depending upon what they had done in the past. Can you guys talk to me about the pros and cons and some challenges of doing more with data and making progress in your digital transformation journey? Dave, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, from the standpoint of working with legacy systems and not having standards is, I think trying to get it to a standard as close to the source is the right approach, right? So once you so that way, the brown field and the green field will now look alike. And the closer you can get to that normalization and standard and creating a standard around that, I think is better, because then that provides the least amount of change as new systems come on, right? Because if you're creating a standard at the PLC level or at the data collection level, then the use case you build for anomaly detection can be replicated very easy, because it's using the same data and being ingested in is happening earlier on in the process, right? So I think that's where creating a standard is there. But the other side of that is I think people that create a standard and are so rigid about it, don't want to change it, could also lead them down a bad path. So you need to have create a standard with the mindset of being able to change it and have a process to do that.
Absolutely. Travis, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. But another point I can bring in is when you're looking at sort of, okay, I think we all can agree that from an architecture standpoint, bringing an edge, getting the data, the source of truth closer to the edge of the network, right, to those devices, I think is important, because, hey, we can get out more data, we can scale our systems more, right, and we don't have to do it all at once, kind of just do pieces at a time and have, being able to define those model and context. I think that that is important. But when we're doing it, we got to make sure that we're doing it with tools that make it easy for that, if you will, that brownfield to greenfield kind of that world transition without having to write a lot of code everywhere. My point here is I've seen a lot of systems fail because we get these systems where we're going to write proprietary code that's going to map this to that. And it might work for a POC, for a pilot. But I've seen many pilots succeed and many rollouts fail because we don't think about the overall end game and the scaling that's there. So that's like probably the biggest. I mean, yes, you can change models, you can change course on certain things, but if you have the right tools and foundations in place, then you're going to be able to do that a lot easier. Kind of, again, avoiding any kind of customization of code or crazy mapping patterns. I've also seen people who have gotten data to the cloud where you look at their architecture cloud and there's about 10,000 services that's going through, right, to get to the analytics piece. And it's right. And it's just, how is that going to, how are you going to manage that later? How are you going to scale that later? What does that look like? So right. It's a difficult thing to do. I get, but it's one just to be mindful of as you go forward.
Yeah, that's a great point. Somebody's actually talking about that earlier, and it brought up a thought to me. And I know, Travis, you guys are working, very closely with MQTT and message brokers. But I look at, pick a message broker, right? There's lots of them out there. So I'm not going to pick anyone specific on it, but the idea of being able to send that payload that does have more data, that has context in it, to send that, when the data is changing or when it's needed, as opposed to that pull response we've been doing for 3 decades, or forever, I guess I should say, is that allows you, one, to change that easily, but it also allows you to scale, because if you think about it, because of the wildcard capabilities of those message brokers, now all of a sudden you can just subscribe to all my pumps or all my temperatures or all my packaging or my filling machines or whatever. It allows you to build those use cases to scale easily, which you couldn't do before, right? Because you have to map all the data directly. Now, if you get into that unified, broker, right, that and all the data, you can use that wildcard, and then you can make a single solution of code and then have that scale to all your machines. I mean, that's how we approach the systems as well, is build that use case, think ahead enough that think about the scale when it does roll out, right? Don't build that one-off POC that you basically throw out and have to start over on that, to your point.
Exactly. I mean, you look on the IT world, it's something that's been a concept's been around for a long time, right? Message brokers, message queuing, those kind of systems. It's been there forever. And the innovations happen, right? They have tools that come in, I plug it in, I'm able to do some things, get some value. If it doesn't work out, fine, I take it out, I use something else, right? We're not changing the foundation there. And I think that world, it's all we're trying to do is bring it into the OT world and leverage that same technology here, because decoupling our devices from the consumers, the applications, has a lot of benefits over time, not just scaling, but I can actually bring in something new, try it out, and experiment. I can replace parts of the system. Maybe there's a legacy PLC that if I have let's say I do have a really old PLC, and it's hard to get PLCs these days, right? You're going to try to go find one on eBay and spend a lot of money for it. But yes, there's investment if I want to get a newer one to have to change the programming and all that. But if I already have something in place that maps that PLC to a model, then, and it's going to a broker or message queuing system, ultimately, then I can go and get a brand new one. Maybe I can then just adjust the model on that brand new sensor or PLC, and it'll publish the same way. I don't change any of my applications, right? I've been able to replace that. And I think exactly that mentality is what is really changing the game if it's being adopted.
Right. And like I said, there's a mind that goes right into that. What I was talking about is that flipping your mind, and the guy, the OT guy, their control engineer that's been doing that for the same way for 30 years, kind of have to adjust their thinking about how the data is being sent and received, and all of a sudden you can do that. And like you said, Travis, along the lines of not touching the system, say you have that model that you built and it's all working, the use case is working, you want to try something new. Well, you could always use that payload and build a new model that includes that model and not touch the other one. So as you grow, you can still start experimenting and not touch the new stuff the stuff you already built that's pretty recent. So I just think there's a mentality that I find that you need to switch the way people think about their data and how it's being, subscribed to, because we've been doing it the same way for so long. It's just a little bit of a thought change.
Yeah, I mean, we're so embedded in that, right? Like the people who are running SCADA, and hey, I've seen it. It's this is my domain, my world. These are my PLCs, this is my data, right?
Yeah.
And that's fine. It's worked well because they've had to keep things running. I totally get that. But a shift from the data is not mine. The data is the business's, right?
Right.
SCADA is mine. And as a SCADA, I'm a consumer of the same data along with many other consumers of that data. MES systems, maintenance management systems, ERP systems, SCADA systems, and other business systems that they want, all looking for the same data. Are we going to build infrastructure where they can just get access to it? Or are we going to try to move it around as a spaghetti mess, right? That's right. What we're looking at. So what's cool is that if the adoption's there's some transformational things that can happen for these organizations.
Oh, I think there's huge, like you said, getting the data to the right people. But I think that the tools are there to make that way easier to scale, to implement new stuff, experiment, all those things.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. I think this is fantastic. I want to dig into that a little bit more, especially on the scale side. But I do want to tell everyone that we still have plenty of room in the chat open. If you guys have questions, would again love the ability to stump Dave and Travis. If you guys would like to, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. But going back to the architecture question, right? Both Travis, you and Dave are talking about scale. And so we've talked about how we've seen lots of proof of concepts, succeed, lots of rollouts fail. We've talked about a little bit about how going from one facility to 5 facilities or 20 facilities is a completely different set of calculus than going to build for a single facility. So my question to you guys is, what is the best piece of advice, or what is one thing that people should consider when they go start a project that's going to have to scale beyond the proof of concept or beyond the single facility? Travis, can I ask you first?
Yeah, for sure. My best piece of advice, right, is especially around, for historically, we all know kind of a lot of manufacturers site to site have been independent, right? They kind of have their own budgets, their own teams, they're marching and trying to and figure out things in their own way. And that's been fine. That's worked. But you look at if the business wants to be able to take advantage of that data across the board, they got to start thinking about it at a high level, right? So slow down with some of these projects. If there is a use case that we're trying to solve, first of all, if you don't have a use case, we're not going to go anywhere, right? Like we got to have some business objective we're trying to solve. If we have that, we can then get the teams, ready to go for that. But take a step back at the high level, do investigation, go to each of the sites, and interview people, different managers, whoever. What should this look like? What should, for example, our data model look like? What would make the most sense for us across the board? How can we then take advantage of that as we go forward? Do you have the same problem from this side to that side that you're trying to solve? If we can align those across the organization, then you built basically, here's our proposal, here's where we want to go, and we start marching to that, where I get a POC, but then every site is going to be fitting into that same thing. They're not trying to reinvent the wheel when it comes to that. And I think, to me, that's the biggest advice I can provide.
Yeah. I think along those lines, Travis, I agree with that. Is that architecture, and well, two things I think is the advice. Or one, having that use case, having that business value, right, and being able to share that across. But if you get the architecture right, you can, so as the plants that have the same issues, great, you can standardize that issue and scale it across the plant. But if you get the architecture right, which is using message brokers and other newer technologies, that you can let the people that in their own plant do some of their own things as well, right? Because then you have 5 plants experimenting, coming up with solutions that could then be scaled at other plants. And if they all share the same architecture and that same kind of, pub sub message broker type of wildcarding mentality as just part of it, but being able to share that solution to other plants can then be valuable. So you can scale, it's not just scaling plants or scaling number of tags or anything like that, but it's also scaling use cases, scaling ideas and those kinds of things. So you can start sharing those across. So I love the idea of the standard. Everybody does this, but you also have that experimentation, because that's where innovation comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of it too is just like that executive sponsorship, right? Getting the business to be aligned to those objectives they had, that they have, right? To be able to go and put these things in place and play and experiment to get that value at the end of the day.
Right. And there is no one architecture, by the way.
No,
it depends, right? So you got to look at all the plants and figure out what that's going to look like and what's the best fit.
Yeah, and how you do it today, and how you bring it in today, and how you start slow to then how you will what you're going to look like in the next 5 years, right? How's it going to transform?
Absolutely. I will say we've got a bit of a stumper. I did ask for some stumpers. Vince has got a good question. I'm not sure there is no one answer to this question, Vince. I will say it for all of us. But Vince wants to know if you guys are aware of any standards that you would recommend to start building models against. You list ISA 88 PAC-ML models as an example. As these guys are thinking about it, I will say that there are lots of standards, especially as you expand beyond just the US or North American market. Which standards do we follow becomes a very highly contested conversation.
I would agree.
Yes. And the further, more globally you look at, the more you have to get into. But Travis, Dave, would either of you like to go ahead and to go ahead and give it a shot?
I'll give it a shot. I'll start here. As I've actually worked with a group regarding this. But first of all, we've done a lot, around MQTT and Sparkplug, and and with Sparkplug had the ability to do models. But one intentional part of that is that we didn't define what the model actually was, right? Left that up to the customer because it's so highly contentious, right, in terms of what that's going to be. But I do think if we can get to a place where there's agreement on what these models look like and have some standards around that companies can just use, it does unleash a lot more innovation, because at the end of the day, if we have some analytics or ML algorithm that was built, more customers can take advantage of it. It's not like everybody's trying to reinvent that same wheel. But I have worked with the SESME organization to advance manufacturing, and part of what their initiative is, they're thinking about this, and they're leveraging OPC UA has in their spec. It's a quite big spec, but there's a part of it where they're defining data models, and what they're doing is actually working with various standard body organizations, for example, like robotics. Like a robot, they're working with that robotic standard. I forget what the organization's called, but to basically define what should this look like, and then hopefully get adoption that these equipment that they have out of the gate will just support this model that's already standardized. So it's that single source of truth, right, from the person or the company that you're buying that equipment from. So I hope that kind of thing will take steam. It's all comes down to adoption. There's all sorts of different, I think, efforts out there relating to this. I don't think one is the clear winner, right? We're just, it's going to have to evolve.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think you're, oh, go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say, I have another question. I'm going to go throw this question to Dave, but I actually want to go throw kind of the alternative to what Travis was saying with SESME. is Tomi earlier today. Tomi from Nokia was on. I caught a little bit of his presentation. So Nokia is very big, and Tomi is very big into the OPCUA Foundation, and they are very strong. If you think MQTT and Sparkplug B or those things are strong in what we talk about over here in North America, you guys should go check out what they're talking about with the OPCUA Foundation over in Europe. So I absolutely go suggest that you take a look at Tomi's presentation. Every conversation I've got to have with him is a great conversation. But we have another question, Dave, and I'm going to go throw it over to you. So this is actually from my co-host of Manufacturing Hub, Vlad. Vlad always has questions, which is why he and I are a great duo. Vlad wants to know, so talking about the initiatives of going to align everything, who are you seeing aligning kind of all of these conversations and all of these use cases? From his experience, these initiatives are often brought up at a single site and rarely consider a scalable multi-site development before incurring the technical debt of a proof of concept single site implementation. Dave, I'd love to give you the first opportunity to answer this question.
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about that before, where it's, if you've got 5 sites trying to get together, creating a team maybe, and finding out if they're having similar problems or same problems. But I really do think when you're designing it and coming up with a solution is to think about the scale part of it. How is this going to work in these other plants? So if you've got a new plant versus an old plant, how can you, create the solution that is going to be not only scalable from plant to plant, but also align from old and new and use case to use case. So I think the key on a POC, I know it's talked a lot about, during all these sessions, was brought up quite a bit, but one, having that business value is incredibly important. But I think creating these new teams, like we talked about earlier, that you have to have everybody talking about it and agreeing on those, either the data model, the standards, how they're going to adjust the data, those kinds of things is really important as well. So we run into that quite a bit where we'll, somebody does a single plant, we'll come in and somebody's already solved it, but then they're like, I can't scale this. I run into that all the time. Right. And there's different reasons for that, but usually it's because they didn't think about the scale part of it. All they thought about was solving the one problem immediately and taking the path of least resistance to that. So I really think the key to that, lad, is think about scale from day one, not at these. Thinking about it from the beginning, not from the end.
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
I would like to add to the standardization though too, if I could.
Please.
Yeah, I mean OPCUA Foundation, they've created their data models. Like you mentioned, Travis, is a huge spec. I just wonder how many people are really going to do, follow that spec and the 900 pages that they have in there to follow those data models. That's my concern about it. I agree with the standardization part, but it's just like, that is a tremendous amount of work to get there. So I feel like there's got to be a middle ground in there between, a strict standard that some standards group came up with that is covering every every possibility out there, versus coming up with something that creates your own standard internally that can be used and be developed really quickly. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. I see standards developed all the time, and everybody, it's a standard, but everybody's got a little bit of a twist on it, so it's never quite following that standard.
100%. That's I'm with you, and that is going to be the challenge as we go forward, right? And the adoption and how those get defined. I can tell you that from vendors, we're both here from different vendors, and it's important for us to support the open standards that are taking.
Oh yeah,
right. So like we are doing, I could say for us, right, we're doing a lot with OPCUA in terms of making sure that data models are an inherent part that from our client server implementation, that we automatically have it, ingest it, and work with it. So if something does get developed, guess what? We can then just use it, right? That model product. But if it was already out there, we just get it. And the same thing with MQTT Sparkplug. And if there's anything else that comes out, again, the goal here is to leverage open standards to be able to define the model in a way that can be then used other places, right? How that model gets defined, we'll see how that changes over time, but that, at least this principle is really important, right? So
guys, I am sorry. We are being yelled at because our conversation is too good. We've had too many questions and we have gone too long. I am being told to direct everyone over to the happy hour. We probably won't continue this conversation, but there will be lots of opportunity to continue to have follow-ups, and we will absolutely go ahead and continue these conversations. So we will see everyone in the happy hour.
Great. Thanks.
thank you.
Yep.